Al Harris, who's the pass game coordinator and DB's coach in Chicago with the Bears. Prior to that, he worked in Dallas with Dan Quinn. Wherever he has gone, takeaways have followed. The Bears had 33 takeaways this year, the most in the NFL. They had 23 interceptions, the most in the NFL. Dallas, similarly, was one of the higher takeaway interception teams in the league when he was there. And they've had the league leader in picks in Chicago, in Dallas, under him and his secondary for years now. That part of him as a candidate is intriguing, but this goes against what they've been saying they want.
That's
They've
right.
talked a lot about experience, play caller, someone who's done this before, and this is more would be like a David Blau hire. Never been a DC, never called plays.
Yeah, it is certainly interesting. It's a name that I was wondering where he was in his process because he'd been with Dan Quinn before. I think at one point he said he would go wherever Dan Quinn went as kind of a matter of policy. Of course, it didn't work out that way, but everywhere he's been, as you said, the turnovers have followed. So I'm at least intrigued by that because my philosophy on defense, if you can be great, that's awesome. If you can be Seattle or Houston and Denver at times and be dominant, that's great. But for me, at least a minimum is take something away. Do something to affect the offense. You could be a high turnover team like Chicago, force a bunch of turnovers, but you're going to give up yards, you'll give up points. That's kind of the way Dallas was for the last couple of years. You could be we're eliminating all big plays. That probably means not that much pressure, not that many turnovers, but we're not going to get gashed for 25, 35, 40 yards a chunk. Washington, last several years, has taken nothing away. They've been a disaster on that side of the ball. They don't turn you over. They don't create pressure. They give up huge chunk plays. They stay on the field too long. It's not bend but don't break. It's just bend, break, and shatter and get thrown in the garbage. So he's intriguing in that sense that everywhere he's been, I think to your point, turnovers have followed. At least something positive is on his resume. It's just interesting, though, that he hasn't been more of a candidate both internally in Dallas and now kind of it's late in the game as some of the musical chairs have stopped. I just sort of was wondering about it. I couldn't tell you how he'd be as a DC. We don't know yet. But again, there's at least some feather in his cap there. There's something on the wall that says where he goes, you get a lot of turnovers.
I get the sense that the fan base would be really excited about hiring Al Harris. He's the name that I've seen come up the most among our listeners online and then on the phones as well. And we can open up the phones on this for you guys at 800-636-1067. In fact, his name came up so much that pretty early in the process I'd called over to some of my people over in the building, and I was like, hey, where's Al Harris's name? You guys are talking to Flores and Gannon and Graham and Cullen and Wilson and Scott and Ulbrich and whoever else. Like, what about this up-and-coming guy that everyone seems to love that worked under Dan Quinn, that is one of his buddies, Al Harris? And they're like, yeah, the experience seemed to be what they cared the most about. So that's why they talked to Flores and Gannon and Graham and Cullen, who had all been DC's and called plays. Same with Denard Wilson. In fact, the only guy that they'd interviewed until Al Harris's name popped up yesterday that had not previously been a coordinator and has not called plays was Carl Scott. So I want to get into later in the show when we come back to this topic in the 5 o'clock hour maybe. My secondary angle is going to be that I do think this defensive coordinating search is not going ideally. This has not been idealistic. They wanted Flores. He's staying in Minnesota or becoming a head coach. They wanted Raheem Morris. He's still doing head coaching interviews and has not taken a DC interview from them. They wanted Ulbrich. At one point, I was told he was their top target. He wasn't allowed out of the building in Atlanta and is now their defensive coordinator back under contract with Kevin Stefanski. They wanted or want Jonathan Gannon, but he's got head coaching interviews still ongoing, plus a bunch of DC options, and it just feels to me like maybe they're preparing that he may not either be a fit or take the job. So now, if that's the case, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, you're down to Patrick Graham, who's like the one gray in the beard, longtime play caller DC type. And then Joe Cullen, who was a D-line coach who used to be a coordinator. Denard Wilson, local guy who's younger and a D coordinator. And then the last one would be the pass game coordinator from the Seahawks, Carl Scott, who doesn't really have the experience. So you add Al Harris to that mix. But we'll focus more on what I believe is the search has not gone the way they were hoping or wanted, and that's why they're now kind of regrouping. And it seems like adding someone to the list. We're 2 weeks into this thing.
Yeah.
You're just now interviewing Harris. You basically did one batch of interviews with a bunch of guys, and he wasn't a part of that. But we can get into that in a bit. Focusing just on Harris as a candidate, I actually would be excited by it. My one curiosity, or at least anxiety about the hiring would be you have two really green coordinators now. And supposedly, when they hired David Blau, they said, all right, we need a veteran to call the defensive plays so Dan doesn't have to worry about both. We want Quinn or Quinn wanted to like not have to call the defensive plays and help out a lot, which he would have to do if you bring in a guy who'd never done it with Harris. It'd be more like Joe Witt last year.
Right.
But with Blau on the other side, I think the whole thing is he doesn't want to have to deal with both sides of the building with these new guys that might need help. If you have two of those, that's a nerve-wracking situation for me.
Yeah, so Harris at least has had more responsibility or larger roles than has Blau, who really is a true neophyte. He was playing as recently as a couple seasons ago. Harris is 51, has been around for a handful of seasons as a coach, having held several different positions. But it's still, I think the point stands. This isn't, as you said, gray-bearded, a Romeo Crennel type that's been a defensive coordinator in 10 different cities, et cetera, and has seen everything twice. He would still be elevated to responsibility he's never had before. But again, the name is intriguing to me, both because of the relationship with Quinn, and again, there is something to hang your hat on with him. At a minimum, it's like a really strong correlation, but at a maximum, you got to figure he's doing something right to encourage guys to get guys to intercept the football in the way that he has. I mean, he leaves, and Trayvon Diggs is now about to be on his third team. It seems like, whereas that guy was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He made Deron Bland a thing, and you look at Chicago, a group that was terrible on defense. It's not as if they're good, but they sure as bleep turn you over. At least that's something, right? But yeah, I think to me, Grant, this was inevitable. When you swam or kind of fished in this big pond that they were in, the offensive coordinator, when they took themselves out of it, they said, we're not going after any of these big fish. We've got our own in-house baby fish that we're going to maybe grow to be a whale one day in David Blau. They swam in the big pond with the big boys. You're sitting out there holding hope for Brian Flores, who's got head coaching interview stuff lined up, and he's basically locked into either Minnesota or a head coaching job. When you swim in the big waters, you might miss some of these guys that are in demand. So all of a sudden, they found themselves on the bad end of it.
How would you feel about Al Harris being hired as the defensive coordinator? 800-636-1067. And would you have any reservations about that hire because of the fact that they already have a first-time coordinator who's never done it before, who's going to probably make some mistakes along the way and need some help on the offensive side? It seemed to me like they originally thought, if we're going with Blau, then we can't do the same thing on defense. And that has changed as a lot of their top options, Flores, Ulbrich, Raheem, and maybe Gannon, are either out or likely not going to be the guy. I guess Gannon I'll write with pencil because I think they could still maybe land him. We'll see. But I think I would get excited about Harris just because of the resume. It would be cautiously so because it could go really poorly. And I'll come back to the point. I tweeted this earlier today at Grant H. Paulson. You just referenced it. But I need someone to explain to me why the Dallas Cowboys didn't bring him in and interview him. Now, you could say, well, the Cowboys, maybe they wanted an experienced defensive coordinator. They went and got Matt Eberflus last year. They have a type. Except they are working as we speak right now to sign the Philadelphia Eagles pass game coordinator, effectively the Al Harris of their building, the DB's coach in Philly, who coordinates their pass game on defense, who has never called plays, who has never been a defensive coordinator. They're doing the Al Harris hiring, and they didn't even interview the guy that they know better than anybody else. So when David Blau gets a job in Washington or something like that, you go, oh, they love this guy so much, they couldn't let him out of the building, year too early. Like when you've got a real star, this rising, ascending piece in your building, you act accordingly. That's what Washington did when they had an opening. They basically said, search be damned. This is cursory. This is not real. We're going to interview a couple of guys and hire the dude right down the hall. The Cowboys have had multiple openings the last couple of years, and Harris hasn't even gotten an interview for it. Why is that?
That's the question I don't have an answer to.
Does that give you any pause?
It does. It's the only thing that I can't quite shake. Because, again, in concept, yes, right? A riser. Obviously, again, there is tangible work that you can put up on the board that is good. This isn't a, we hope he will turn into X. It's a, when Al Harris shows up, you get interceptions, right? I mean, at least that's something. So I kind of go, okay, that'll be the identity of the defense then. They'll bend, they'll break at times, they'll give up some big stuff, but they'll turn you over. And maybe that's the way for this offense, just to get the ball back a couple more times, maybe a big play here or there, but at least that's a philosophy, at least it's something. So to me, that's exciting. There's some intrigue there. That's the only pause. That's the negative to me, is the Why didn't others jump at this when there have been multiple opportunities to do so? That's it.
Jerry in Gaithersburg, if they hire Al Harris and they have 2 first-time coordinators in the building going into this huge year for Dan Quinn, could you get down with that?
Well, not really, unless they bring on Greg Williams, G-R-E-G-G, Greg Williams. He was interviewed by John Kine this past week. Oh, my goodness, this guy, he's consulting the NFL folks. Right now, he's just taking care of his daddy over where his parents live. He'd be chomping at the bit, if not to be the D coordinator, at least a consultant.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with him as a consultant. He has not coached in the NFL since 2020. So this isn't quite the Marty Morningwig call that we had so much fun with, because I think Greg Williams has actually still had recent success. He was with the DC Defenders from 2023 to 2025, but he's been coaching recently at Tennessee State. I don't know what level that is or much about that program. I know they play their home games at the Tennessee Titans Stadium in Nashville because my buddy Dan Lang calls their games. But Tennessee State is kind of where he's been plying his trade recently. Would I be interested in talking to him to see what he thinks about my defense? Yes. Do I love him as an advisor? I think that's the role. I'm not hiring him as a DC in 2026.
Not at this point, no.
Let's go to Manny in Southeast in the city. What's up, Manny?
Hey guys, how you doing? Good to talk to you guys, man.
Hey, buddy.
You as well.
I want to be realistic. Al, name a team that he went to where he was the D-backs coach that they didn't give up 30 points a game. Dallas gave up 30 points a game.
They gave up a lot of points.
Don't get it twisted. They produced turnovers, but the defense still gave up 30 points a game.
It's a good point, and you got to ask yourself, like, what's important? I would point out, by the way, the Bears this year gave up the 4th most yards in the NFL.
Yeah.
They gave up the 5th most yards in the NFL on the ground per play. They gave up the 4th most yards in the NFL per, I don't know if it was attempt or completion. This was a bad statistical defense when they weren't taking the ball away. But you could say the same about the Cowboys.
That's what Dallas was, yeah.
At times, too, post Dan Quinn. So that is a reasonable question, I think. The hype is, as you said, wherever he goes, they generate takeaways. A lot of times, though, the DBs coaches are not thought of as D coordinators as much as like linebackers or defensive line types. And the reason for that is they do way more run game stuff. It's like the pass game guys that are in the secondary often need a lot of help with the run game. And maybe he's got a plan and he'd know exactly what he's doing. But just stylistically speaking, you don't see that transition quite as much.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely a data point. Now, how much of that is on him? I have no idea. There's no real way to know because you haven't been the DC before. You go, did they give up 30 points a game because his defensive backs were getting beat a ton? Part of that, yeah, guys were gambling all the time. But that, again, it's the philosophy. My point is, do something. Take something away, right? Right now, the current paradigm in the NFL is just bend but don't break. 2 high shells, everybody drops off, you can complete it underneath a million times. It's what happened as a result of how great Pat Mahomes was. Everyone got tired of getting beaten over the top, so they said, fine, do 15 plays, execute underneath, eventually you'll hold or we'll get a sack or something. And that's where everybody is right now.